Welcome to STARCARD Podcast. Here at STARCARD Podcast, we get a glimpse at the age of Aquarius ahead of us. We also examine the worlds of education and workplace ethics. My name is Breakaway Ray. I like talking about the breakaway civilizations and breaking away from the one we're in now. You've tuned in to a live tarot throw. Today is September 16th, 2025. I also want to talk about two presidents from this encyclopedia of presidents that I brought out yesterday when we talked about and perhaps with President Monroe, gave us a little press conference. I want to try that again. That was cool. You know what? There's so many things missing from history that I'm not even sure there's enough people old enough watching this podcast to know what I'm talking about, except that they might have scrolled through more videos on their feeds and actually have seen some of this stuff. I'm talking about pneumatic air tubes. Pneumatic air tubes. So I'm going from, United States Postal Service to the system of pneumatic air tubes. And from what little I know about them, that would have required tubes running underground. And now, as soon as you say underground, I already think about, how were subways built in the age before gasoline and electricity? These human beings back then must have been superhuman, to work hard all day just shoveling, and they get it perfect every time. We couldn't duplicate the stuff that they did in the 1800s, supposedly, right? Of course, I don't believe that that's what happened. Again, I'm saying there's a lot of stuff that's missing. I wonder which civilization did build and design all that stuff. I'm still learning, but I think we all need to start looking around and paying attention to it. So anyway, you got the pneumatic tubes going under the city. Seems like an efficient system. Oh, you have an efficient system. It helps everybody. Let's find a way to monetize it. Kind of like what Edison did with electricity. And wait, I think I got a list of kind of likes over here. See, yeah, the mail tubes. I don't even know what they're called, but they're like pneumatic mail tubes pushing little cylinders through air tubes to their destinations. Okay, free energy. I just spoke about that. Why are we paying for electricity? Why are we even setting up a system like that in the first place? Okay, free rail transport, and not just free rail transport, but probably what it reminds me of is the underground in Moscow, the subway system there. It's for the public, and it looks like a palace, and it had chandeliers. I'm talking about the 1980s. That's when I was there. So, I'm talking about not just nationwide, but worldwide rail travel like that. Luxurious Orient Express rail travel, free trolley rides, okay, on wonderful trains for everybody, public, and it's free. Imagine that. And, it's so good, someone had to break it all. And so we could start over, and then they could start selling back to us what we already had. This is the stuff that's going on in my mind, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in. This is for entertainment purposes only. Wait, my kind of like list. Wait, there's more. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The air transport. After the Hindenburg, nobody wants to pay attention to, what those airships were all about. So I invite you to explore. There's enough people on social media showing videos of all the stuff that I'm talking about. And I might also remind you, Michelle Gibson does a good job describing, these canal systems and these rail systems and the infrastructure that, from my point of view, I'm starting to share her point of view on this. This stuff was already here, well before the United States got settled by Europeans, for example. I should have said North America got settled by Europeans. It was there probably for hundreds, if not 1,000 years, perhaps. Yeah, what do? You take those, the mail system, the energy system, the rail system, the air transport system, and then you phase it out and you privatize it. And then once you privatize it, you have a corporation in charge of something that the government should have been in charge of. And that's starting to bleed into fascism. Remember, fascism is when corporation controls the state. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you about two of our U.S. presidents. Going back to this book again. This book from the 1990s. Okay, so it's definitely not up to date, but it's a lot of fun to talk about. So I'm going to read my notes here about John Adams. I know a little bit about him, from my previous career, just to check here. Okay, he's from Braintree, Massachusetts. And his wife was also an intellectual and influential because she was so influential with her husband. One thing that her prowess was with the family budget. So she was able to, keep things above board and in the black so that John Adams could pursue his interests in public administration and public service. Okay. So kudos to that first lady who ended up being the second first lady. All right. So John Adams, before he was president, he was a lawyer. And if you remember your United States history, there was something called the Boston Massacre. I think it was in either 1775 or 1774. And John Adams was the defender for the soldiers, the British soldiers that were involved. So for a lot of us, our ego and our heart says, how could you stick up for the British soldiers after the Boston Massacre? But remember, he was being professional. He was being professional. In fact, if you think about it, how could you let anyone just face a bunch of consequences without due process? If you expect due process for yourself, you need to show due process to everybody else. Right. Enough on that another day, right? So that's one thing that John Adams was known for. And so then I want to jump right to John Adams's tenure as vice president. So what happened was, in the old days, there were two people who would run against each other for the office of president, and the loser would be the vice president. This was in the days before running two people on the same ticket. So George Washington ran against John Adams, according to history, for the office of president of the United States. Washington won. Adams was runner-up, and he was then the vice president. Now, unfortunately, he ended up staying on the sidelines like famous NFL football Hall of Famer Marcus Allen on the LA Raiders. John Adams was extremely competent, extremely knowledgeable and qualified, very well trained, had lots of bridges of communication in the diplomatic world and in the world of government and public service. However, the Constitution only said, the vice president just stands by and does the job if the president can't. And George Washington held him to that and never involved him in the government. Anyway, when George Washington was done with his 8 years, John Adams finally won the election and became president. He became our second president. I want to point out that he most assuredly went to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the 1770s and 1780s. And when I say that, I mean John Adams probably saw old world Philadelphia with all those buildings, even with the ones that are missing today. All that stuff was already there. I'm very sure John Adams saw all that in person, right? Okay. Now, as president, John Adams was known to exercise each morning, and he would go swimming in the Potomac River. And so he was keeping his body in shape so he could do a good job. And by the way, taking care of your body is a spiritual activity. Right on, John Adams. You're not only smart, but you're a balanced person, right? Okay. Okay. After his reelection, oh, here we go. Finally, these are my last notes on John Adams, right? Okay. So after Adams lost his reelection bid to Thomas Jefferson, the two became lifelong friends. According to the story, the two died on July 4th, Independence Day in the United States of America. And supposedly John Adams's last words were, "At least Jefferson lives." Right, that was 1826 when the two former presidents and good friends passed away. So now on to John Quincy Adams. Yeah, I think I'm going to read my notes and then we'll go to the encyclopedia and then we'll have a press conference with the tarot cards. What do you say? Okay, John Quincy Adams, a lifelong insider. I mean, if he's hanging around with his dad, he knew George Washington personally. He knew Thomas Jefferson personally and early on. He knew James Monroe. He knew all those circles, okay? He was like the kid who was the son of the manager who was hanging out in the dugout with all the all-stars, right? That was when he was a kid. He also toured in Europe while his dad was ambassador. Let's see. Here I go. All right, so as president, John Quincy Adams kept the previous president's advisors. He kept James Monroe's advisors. because he kept them as experienced, talented public servants. Okay. Now, he didn't want to give in to the energy of, political squabbles. Everyone said, don't keep Monroe's advisors. They're going to undermine you. He said, no, they are public servants. They're qualified for their job. Okay, I'm keeping them on the team. And I want to point out that there were two other presidents who kind of operated the same way. One was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln had a group of very headstrong, very proud individuals on his cabinet. In fact, it was his Secretary of State Seward that thought he thought that he was really going to be the president, and that Lincoln really didn't have anything. He needed like a little help, right? He was going to be like the father figure and take care of Lincoln and help him. That's not obviously what happened. But I like how Mr. Seward had a good public self-image and a good private self-image. I want someone like that in charge, knowing that he can lead, right? So, and then the other thing with Kennedy was he also had supposedly, a lot of opinionated people on his cabinet advising him. But again, that's what I want. I want to hear all points of view. I can't be right all the time. Someone's got to have to point out what I might be missing. I only got two eyes. So I like those ideas. However, it didn't work out for John Quincy Adams. The politics were pretty heated. And in fact, the Monroe advisors did not make it easy for John Quincy Adams, despite their expertise. Apparently, that's how it turned out. Or that's how I'm going to tell the story. STARCARD podcast, this is for entertainment purposes only. First of all, John Adams, second United States president. You can see what the country looked like at that map at the bottom. Those three states in red were added while Adams was in office. And if you look up in the top center, I've highlighted the day he died, July 4th, 1826. He's from Braintree, Massachusetts. And let's see if there was another point I wanted to show you. Not particularly, but I want to say thank you to John Adams for all his great public service. And I'm going to flip through Mr. Madison and Mr. Monroe, and we're going to get to John Quincy Adams. He's the star of the show today, in my opinion. Okay, so John Quincy Adams, born July 11th, 1767. He was born before the American Revolution in 1777. He was a 10-year-old boy at the time when the Revolution broke out. He's also from Braintree, Massachusetts. Sadly, he died February 23rd, 1848, and that would have been about 16 years before the Civil War broke out in the United States. He had a vice president named John C. Calhoun. His first lady was Louisa Catherine Johnson. And according to what I see here, Mr. Quincy Adams had 4 children, John, Charles, Louisa, and George Washington Adams. He named one of his kids George Washington. So what I'm highlighting here is that, I'll show you what I'm pointing at. It's the date, July 4th, 1828. Dateline, Baltimore, Maryland, July 4th, 1828. The railroad is here. Okay, so I'm reading what it says in the book, but I'm pretty sure even Mr. Quincy Adams, President John Quincy Adams, would say, hey, that's not exactly, don't make it look like that. The railroad was already here. Maybe they already dug it out. Maybe they were open for business. Now people had to pay for it. Okay. But this is definitely history rewritten from Breakaway Ray's point of view. And I'm calling it to everyone's attention because there's a pattern of always hiding the technology that benefits the commons, what benefits all of us. Okay. Here's why I'm going to ask for John Quincy Adams' position or comments on infrastructure in the United States. There's something here called the American system. Let me just read you what I highlighted here, please. Adams was the first president to champion the government's role in making internal improvements for the benefit of trade. Okay, so we're talking about structure and trade that helps everyone, right? But then to get to this paragraph right here about infrastructure, okay, this almost closes up the book on what I'm doing on John Quincy Adams here. It says here, because of the opposition Adams faced within his own administration and in Congress, he was able to win passage of only 2 public works projects. One was an extension of the Cumberland Road into Ohio. The other was the construction of a canal between the Ohio River and the Chesapeake Bay. So President Quincy Adams wanted to have more public infrastructure. However, it didn't turn out the way he hoped. And I want to point out 2 more things before I close this book. One is photography. John Quincy Adams was the first president to be photographed according to history. This is called a daguerreotype. That's a quite crisp, high-def photography there. Hey, yeah. What do I think? Can you read my mind? Yeah, we've had photography before. Okay, and then I want to read to you again a little bit more about what a dedicated public servant he was. So it says here, after the presidency. Check this out. This is why, like, this guy's my hero. Check this out. I'm going to get my magnifying glass here. Okay. After John Quincy Adams lost the 1828 election to Andrew Jackson, most people expected him to retire. Instead, in 1830, the 63-year-old Adams ran for a seat in the House of Representatives and won. He thus became the first president to serve in Congress after leaving the White House. Adams was often in the minority on issues such as the National Bank, which he favored, and the annexation of Texas, which he opposed. But he had a great success in 1844 when he helped to repeal a congressional rule that suppressed petitions against slavery. To frustrate this gag rule, Adams spent many hours reading these petitions into the official record. What an American hero. That is awesome. Thank you, John Quincy Adams. So, what I want to know from John Quincy Adams, if he would care to comment, if the Tarot World can help us get a message from him, I want to know what he has to say about already existing old world infrastructure. I'm pretty sure, who better to ask, right? Who better to ask? I mean, if there's nothing to say, I'm sure there'll be nothing to say, right? And then the other thing I want to ask about is the value of public employees and safety nets, another theme of this morning's presentation. So we're going to go down to the Tarot Cam. We're going to invite President John Quincy Adams to join us and give us a message. Of course, we'll let the president have the final word on his way out the door. So let's go to the Tarot Cam. All right, Tarot World. You know, I've been writing notes and studying for a couple hours. I'm pretty sure President John Quincy Adams has been waiting for his turn to speak. Good morning, Mr. President. Thank you for joining us. Would you care to comment on infrastructure in the United States, especially the old world infrastructure? Would you like to talk about public safety nets and the value of public employees? Thank you, Mr. President, for your time. It's a great honor to have you here. These are from President John Quincy Adams. He'd like to share his remarks to help the tarot deck. So great to have him here. Thank you, Mr. President, for joining us. This message is from John Quincy Adams. Thank you, Mr. Adams. Then I'm sure you have an inspirational, fun, responsible message for us, Mr. Adams, at the end of your conference. Thank you for your time today. And one more off the bottom. All right. See, it's all for entertainment purposes only. This is the kind of stuff I could have expected to see like in a weird Scooby-Doo cartoon where he goes and travels in time and talks to John Quincy Adams. Anyway, we're going to try it with tarot cards. First up, oh, is this the way I put it? Okay. The value of public employees and safety nets, please. The hangman says we need to take another look at something, take a different perspective. And looks like we have to balance something, says the Two of Pentacles. And then the Three of Cups says there will be a celebration. Let's take another look at balancing everything for real. And then we'll have good reason to celebrate, with our families, because we'll all be there and we won't have to worry about living hand to mouth and paycheck to paycheck. And then the moon suggests the unconscious and intuition. And it also says illusion and mystery. Or was I not just talking about Scooby-Doo? And what was that van called? The Mystery Mobile. But I think the moon card is here because it talks about intuition. And I think maybe what the message might be is that in your heart, intuitively that it's the right thing to do. You have to have a social safety net. If that is the message, President John Quincy Adams, thank you very much for agreeing with me. I agree with you, sir. Okay. Next, would you please comment on already existing old world infrastructure? If I'm correct, not only did you witness it and see it and walk through those buildings yourself, but as president, you were trying to reconfigure and reoperate some of this infrastructure. So we invite you to comment, sir. First up, the Three of Pentacles, it talks about collaboration and teamwork. Wow. And then the Lover's card talks about the power of two together. There might be more to this. These both have special breakaway ray meanings. Hang on a second. Here is the walkaway card, the Eight of Cups. There's something that no longer serves, so we walk away from it, even though the Eight Cups are all right there. And then finally, the Seven of Wands indicates a challenge. So maybe there's a couple of different meanings here. I asked about already existing old world infrastructure. And the first thing is that these are both, to me, spiritual connection cards. Like, for sure, you are collaborating with the spirit world. And yes, the spirit world is here and we love you and we've always been around. And this is definitely communication. And the communication is about the perfectly good cups that we walked away from, the infrastructure that we walked away from just so that we could find ways to sell it to the public and make them wage slaves, as it were. And so the whole situation is very challenging. Anyway, I kind of like how that one went. So now we're going to invite the president to make his final remarks. We are so grateful. Hey, let me adjust this. Stop looking at my pajamas. Okay, now we want to adjust this, and then we want to invite the president to make his final remarks. Thank you so much for joining us today. President John Quincy Adams, great public servant, great hero to the United States of America. Your last words, your last remarks, sir, please. Yeah, the magician. Okay, he really did create magic on his own and through collaboration with others. But there's magic going on here. I love it. This is the King of Wands. This is the big picture. If we talk about what we just did here with the tarot cards, we did some magic to get in touch with someone who understood the big picture, the King of Wands. That's right, Mr. Adams. Okay. Oh, is he a great leader or what? It's the King of Cups. And the King of Cups, we might as well get these cards read. And then finally, the Queen of Cups. All right. So check out that power lineup. Does that, that's how a former president walks out of the room. Okay. I'm a magician. I got the big picture. I'm the diplomatic leader, empathic, who cares about his subjects. And speaking of empathic and comforting and caring about us, how about the Queen of Cups? She closes up with comments like compassion, comfort, calm, nurturing, healing, emotionally stable, intuitive, and caring. Yeah, one more time, thank you, President John Quincy Adams.